Hello, friends. This is William with Believe Unlimited. Truly had a great weekend and had some thoughts coming from some of the previous videos that I did and want to tie some things together. And one of the things that I know I mentioned with children and is know your boundaries. And how do you even know where to set your boundaries, and how do you set a boundary, and what is a boundary, and how do you live with boundaries? And this fabulous book I highly recommend is the book Boundaries. And what he teaches in there is so interesting on setting boundaries. And when you do set boundaries, you need to have a consequence for the boundary, and the consequence needs to be something that you will enforce. And there's tricks and tips on how to do it. And that's fantastic. And read the book. And if you have any questions, you don't get it, and you want to shoot me a message, and I'll help you with it, because I love the thought of boundaries. And when I was creating some boundaries and trying to figure out where they are in my life, and even when I didn't even know I had boundaries or what the boundaries were, I had some of the greatest experiences, because it's like sitting in a park and judging the distance to something. And within 50 feet to 100 feet, you can be fairly accurate. Maybe even out half a mile, you can be fairly accurate at judging the distance. But if you're talking miles and miles out, our perspective on how close or how far something is, and it could be a hill or a mountain or whatever it is, we don't know where that is. It looks 6 miles away, it's actually 15. It looks 6 miles away, it's actually 2. We lose the ability to see how far it is. So when we're sitting in ourselves and we are going, okay, I'm setting a boundary, and that boundary is there, we're actually not sure where there is. What I found through my experience is the easiest way to set a firm boundary in our life of this is outside of my character, outside of what is true for me, and we set a boundary. The best way to set that boundary is to be completely open and to go past where that boundary is, to have an experience. Yeah, sometimes unpleasant, sometimes not the most exciting experience, sometimes amazing experiences, but you still find your boundary. And it's so easy. It's because when you look out, this is where you thought your boundary was, but when you go past it and you realize, whoa, that was nothing, this is where my boundary is. But when you look back from being past your boundary, you now know where it is. So looking back from being outside of your boundaries is actually the simplest way to set a boundary, is because you now know that point at which it went from feeling okay to not okay. Now we can set a boundary. And then when we set consequences for that boundary, when in a relationship, in a partnership, in a business ship, in whatever, we're setting a boundary that at this point, it's no longer feels good to me, and I don't want to participate in that. What we do is we set the consequence to teach others what our boundaries are. We set a consequence, and that consequence has to be implementable. It has to be something that you're willing to do that won't cause the greatest blow up. So saying, if you know, for instance, you know, me saying to my partner, and you know, if you look at a guy that's it, we're done. It's not a consequence that I would follow through on, because ending a relationship over a misconstrued glance or a look is not, the consequence is too big for the breach in the boundary. And that's actually not one of my boundaries, but that's an example. So it's having a consequence that, for instance, you're talking with somebody on the telephone and they get very aggressive and they get really aggressive with you, and you choose not to participate anymore because you've got a boundary now that you set, and you tell them that boundary, when you cross the boundary that I'm setting, when you cross that, I will choose to hang up. And it doesn't mean I'm mad. I'm not giving you what's for. I just have a boundary, and when that boundary is crossed, this is what I'm going to do. So at this point, when you get aggressive on the telephone, I'll just hang up and we'll talk to you later. So if it were to happen, they get angry, you hang up, no big deal. You give them a call tomorrow, give them a call later that day, whatever you choose. And you set that boundary and you make it so that you can follow through on the consequence, or that boundary becomes worthless. Now, if anyone gets angry at you because you set that boundary, they've been taking advantage of you up till then, and they're just angry that you set a boundary, so they can't take advantage of you. So setting a boundary is a good thing, because you can say, this is when you get aggressive and you start shouting or yelling at me on the phone, I will hang up. Doesn't mean I'm not. And you give that to them. You tell them, this is how it is from this point forward. I'm not getting angry at you. It's just a boundary. If you cross the boundary, this is what I'm going to do. And you hang up. Now it's no longer up to me to worry about if that ever happens, because it's their choice now. It's not up to me. If they choose to get aggressive and I hang up, then I guess they chose to get aggressive. It's not about me anymore. I don't have to react. I don't have to get upset. I just go along with my day. It didn't even bother me. Why? Because I said, well, if you get aggressive on the phone, I'm going to hang up. They got aggressive, you hung up, that's it. There's no anger, there's no frustration, there's no overwhelmment. You set a boundary, you followed through on it. And if they phone you back and they're angry and they get aggressive, you hang up. Now, I know this is all easy in practice, or in theory. In practice, a little more difficult. But the biggest thing that I've seen others and myself even is we set consequences. They're unrealistic to the breach of the boundary. And then we aren't able to follow through on the consequence. So therefore, setting the boundary becomes fruitless because we don't follow through on the consequence. So therefore, we're teaching them that it's okay that they keep doing that, because we're not willing to follow through on the consequence. So the consequence doesn't have to be harsh. It only has to be noticeable. If you get aggressive at me, I'm going to choose not to look you in the eye. If you get rude to me when we're out in public, I choose to go to the car. When you learn to set boundaries, then you can expand and you grow your boundaries so that each situation you have a prearranged, if you, then I. So if you choose to, then I choose to. And everyone has choice. Boundaries are a beautiful thing. So know your boundaries. And the first way to know a boundary is to allow it to be pushed past the point that you are okay. That's one of the most difficult parts. and then come back and revisit it and know where your boundary is, and then communicate. This is the boundary. I ask your assistance in working on this boundary because this is something that I'm setting for myself. And if the boundary is breached by you, therefore, this is the consequence. And make the consequence small. You can always rev up and increase consequences, but it's really hard to take a consequence of, I'll never speak to you the rest of your life, and then they're gone. You can't chunk the consequence down, but you can rev a consequence up. If you choose to, then I choose to, and this is the consequence. If you implement it and it seems to be ignored and you implement it, then you renegotiate it. And you even can ask, so tell me, to help me help you, how do I help you recognize when what's going on is pushing me outside of my boundary? You're infringing upon my boundary. How do I help you understand how that's happening? And it's all in the communication. And when we set good consequences, those consequences are identifiable, but not necessarily harsh. They're not necessarily a punch in the nose. They're not necessarily a punch in the groin. They're a consequence that is identifiable. They understand that consequence. They recognize that, oh, I went too far. That's all you want. You don't want the consequence to be a punch in the gut, because they don't need the punch in the gut. They already know they did something wrong as soon as they recognize the consequence. And they have to be your own. I can't give you a book with what to say on what. That's up to you. It's how you communicate, how you set your own boundaries. But it is so important to know your boundaries. So that I hope you have some fun with that. I hope you're not always going to have fun with that, but I hope you find yourself in a safer, more vibrant place because you understand some of your boundaries and you start to set some identifiable consequences so that you help others to identify when they are breaching one of your boundaries. And you're important because you're the only one that's going to take care of you the way you need to be taken care of. Because only you know what is authentic to you and what you want to be and how you want to live. So be true to yourself. You stay awesome, and we'll catch you next time.